everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the Collingwood BigFooty podcast. I am the Mighty T, and joining me tonight we have a very special guest, Super Mod from the Hawthorn board. We have Messenger. How you doing tonight, Messenger?
I'm very well. I like the way you say super too. It makes me feel more powerful.
As it should. We know about your overarching control over the board, so we're very privileged to have you aboard. And also we have podcast regular and equally important, 76. 76, how you doing tonight?
Yeah, doing very well. I'm feeling a bit embarrassed because I'm just a mere moderator, not a super moderator. And I'm wondering, Messenger, what's the difference?
I get to wear teal on the board, so I think that's a pretty nice thing. I guess the
very
only
fetching.
I get to be responsible for more boards than is really necessary for any one person. But that's about it.
It sounds like something you really enjoy, Messenger, I must say.
I've really talked it up, haven't I?
You really have. You're selling it to all of us out there who aspire to moddom as it is.
Oh yes.
Hey, 76. Just quickly, how did your interview go this week with our former Premier Jeff Kennett?
Yeah, so I had a great chat with Jeff Kennett earlier in the week, and we haven't discussed it yet, but we'll discuss it later on. But we have the Beyond Blue Cup coming up this weekend between Collingwood and Hawthorn. Yep. And Jeff Kennett had a chat to me to talk about the work that he does with Beyond Blue. And, yeah, just a bit of a chat about his thoughts about the upcoming game. Look, he was lovely to chat to, really nice bloke. And, look, I mean, Jeff Kennett's a very divisive political character. I'm somebody on the, I'm very. I think he did a fantastic job for Victoria, and I say that as somebody who lives in Sydney these days. And I really wish he came up here and ran this state. I reckon we could do with somebody like that. But anyway, the work that he does these days with Beyond Blue is fantastic. They do a lot of good work, and yeah, it was very interesting to have a chat to him about that.
I think I speak for everyone when I say that I can't wait to hear the interview in full. So everybody, stay tuned after our main panel ends this week. But we'll launch right into the football action for the moment. And this past weekend, our beloved Collingwood Magpies managed to get a win over the reigning premiers and a bit of retribution for earlier on in the year. At 76, how did you see the weekend's performance?
Yeah, it's normal transmission has been resumed, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a massive change, hasn't it, in the last couple of weeks?
Absolutely, and well, certainly we've continued the dominance we have over Sydney at ANZ Stadium. That's over the years it's been more of a home ground to us than it has been to Sydney. They don't play there too often themselves, and it's always me living up here in Sydney, it's always something that I look forward to in the calendar every year to go and see the Mighty Pies play out at the ANZ Stadium. And look, it was great to go there not really sure what to expect. Obviously, we had the really good game against Essendon. There are a lot of asterisks against that game, which we know about. Were Essendon affected by other things in their mind? And Sydney was going to be the real test. I've got to say, when I walked into the ground at about the 5 or 6 minute mark of the first quarter, I wasn't feeling too confident about proceedings. We were about 4 goals down at that stage, but they stopped the bleeding and turned it around and ended up with a good win. So very happy to see that.
Were you as surprised as I was to see our midfield? And I don't use this word lightly, but it really was a domination of the very highly thought of Sydney midfield.
Absolutely, particularly given we've got young Josh Thomas in there. He's obviously still learning his craft. His game number 5, 6 or 7, sub 10 anyway. And look, Dame Beams is only 3 or 4 games back from a fairly long-term injury. Yep. So having him finding touch again was obviously good to see. Pendlebury has had a look, it hasn't been his best season. He's been pretty quiet this year. But seeing him obviously have the good game against Essendon and really take it up to next level and play well against Sydney as well. So, look, yes, to answer your question, I was very pleasantly surprised, and hopefully we can keep it going.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Well, another 7 weeks of it, don't we? On the other side of the fence, Messenger, you guys were pretty routine in your disposal of the Saints on Friday night, even with a few big names out. How did you rate the performance of the Hawks?
It was not a pleasant game to watch. I think it was very much a do enough to win type performance. It's been a fairly typical Hawthorn season this year, is that the teams that they're expected to beat, they've beaten them but haven't done so in any grand fashion. But it was, it was one of those ones you nodded off to about three-quarter time. It was a very lacklustre affair. But, we got through, and we've got a much bigger game coming up this Friday night.
But I guess this is the thing. When you're a successful club, when you're a big club, your supporters have a level of expectation, and this is something that I'm sure you'll understand, Messenger, more than anyone else. Because like Collingwood, I believe Hawthorn won their premiership quite early in 2008. I mean, I'm not saying the club wasn't ready for it, but it was with a list that everyone would envision, back to back or three in a row, or this dynasty. And I remember the word dynasty being bandied around after 2010 for us as well. Do you think that Clarkson has done? I mean, obviously he's done a good job. He's obviously a good coach. But do you think that supporters are overly critical of the team's performance thus far without having won that second premiership yet?
I think the short answer is yes. I think it stems from a couple of things. I think people would look much more favourably upon him this year if we'd beaten Geelong in one of the two games we played them in. But I guess I go back to the first point. Is it wasteful to only win one premiership? Paul Roos has only won one premiership. John Worsfold got one out of that great West Coast squad. Mick Malthouse had got one out of Collingwood, and he was there for 11 seasons. It's really only been that Geelong dynasty, and I think we're really going to look back on Geelong in the next 15 or 20 years and be amazed at how really great they are. One premiership's not nothing in this league now, and two's almost a bonus. I guess there is a good argument to say that with the quality of the Hawthorn list that winning only one is profligate. And certainly we blew 2012. I don't think there's any question of that. Sydney took all their chances on that day and we didn't. But I think Hawthorn's, Hawthorn are built for the now, and the expectation is that the window is fairly short. We've got this year, maybe we've got next, and then, which is at the end of Clarkson's contract as it happens, and then there's going to be a lot of decisions made about what the shape of Hawthorn looks like from 2015 on.
Can I just comment on that, Mighty T, that getting back to the Collingwood part, that I think, when you suggest that the Collingwood supporters have been a bit upset about only getting the one premiership and not having the dynasty, I think it depends on what Collingwood supporters you're talking about. I think any Collingwood supporter over the age of 30, I think are pretty damn happy with what they can get. But if you're dealing with Collingwood supporters under the age of 30, then they don't appreciate the hardship that what Collingwood's gone through in its past.
Oh, I almost take offence. 76. I'm the ripe old age of 23. So, but look, but I do know what you mean. But it's one of those things where Collingwood's embarking on their, and I think it's now the 7th successive finals campaign. And, this generation of Collingwood supporters, the younger ones that you're talking of, we have gotten used to our club being relatively successful. And I certainly am under no illusions about how difficult these premierships are to win. And we peaked at the right time in 2010. We were the best team, in my opinion, in 2010. And possibly in 2011 up until round 17. But they are very difficult to win. And look, I think that, as I said, because we are such a big club, because we have experienced success, there is that expectation. And I think that Hawthorn supporters, and I'll switch back to you for a second, Messenger, because I do know myself, they've looked at recruiting choices. Like, we looked at Brian Lake with, Sam, is it Sam Gibson? Josh Gibson. Come across a couple of years ago, David Hale. These have all been players that have been brought in mind for a premiership. Would you think that the recruitment and the way Clarkson's gone about the recruitment is the right way? Was the right thing for the club?
They've been a little more artful than perhaps just. I mean, it is a team, as I said, it's a list built for the now, but they have managed to do some succession planning with their lower end picks. I think for the most part, the guys they brought in from other clubs have done very well. We could probably argue that we paid overs for David Hale, but Gibson's been brilliant as far as I'm concerned. He should have at least an All-Australian under his belt. Gunston is a long-term prospect. Yep. Burgoyne, I think he's probably been about on par for the age we recruited him. But for the most part, I think they've done a pretty good job.
But we're on to this Friday night's game, and it really is a very, very, very big game for both clubs, probably more for the Pies in terms of their standing towards the end of the year. I think the Hawks are pretty safe with their top 4 berths, certainly. But Collingwood will be up against Hawthorn this week. We'll be contesting the Beyond Blue Cup, as 76 mentioned before. And I'll open with you, 76. What are we expecting for this weekend's game? Another no change for the side? Are we pretty happy with the list?
Look, I think there will be a couple of changes, purely because of the 6-day turnaround. 2 6-day turnarounds in a row. We've played 2 fairly draining games. So, look, I wouldn't be surprised if Grundy gets a rest. He's been obviously shouldering a lot of the ruck work over the last 2 weeks. This week will be his 4th game, if he does play. I wouldn't be surprised if he does get a rest and maybe Hutto comes in and gives him a chop out. But yeah, apart from maybe 1 or 2 of the young lads, then I'd be thinking that Buckley'd be wanting to minimise the changes.
Now, we obviously went up against the Hawks earlier in the year. 3 goals, 6 in the first quarter. Is it? Did we really let an opportunity slip to? I know we faded away late in the game. Certainly after in that third quarter and after 3/4 time, we were done and dusted. But did we really miss an opportunity to get a win over the Hawks in round 3?
Well, you spoke about the start, and look, that's been the story of the season, hasn't it? Even last week when we enjoyed a good week over the Swans, we were a bit late getting off the plane and didn't really start playing until halfway through the first, which is probably a bit earlier than has been in previous games. But yeah, look, that is apart from the Essendon game, maybe the Geelong game. We really have had the best of starts, and look, I'm hoping the club can sort that out. But yeah, I don't know what's going on there.
Well, Messenger, Hodge, Birchall and Franklin were 3 names that absolutely tore us a new one last time we played. And there are also 3 names that missed the past weekend's game against the Saints. Any chance they're going to miss this one as well? I'm not hopeful or anything.
I think you're out of. I think Buddy will play. He was really kept out of last week. I mean, my understanding was if that game had been at the MCG against better quality opposition, he would have played. But they spared him a week on Etihad Stadium, and he wasn't really required against the Saints. Birchall is coming off 8 weeks off with a PCL. I would be surprised if he came straight back in to AFL football. He's likely to spend a week at Box Hill, I would think. Hodge is listed as a test with the hand. I'd be surprised if Hodge played. The other name you might see is Liam Shields. He's come back off an injury. He did a bit of a short run with Box Hill last week in a big win over Essendon, and he could well come into the side. The other one we may see is young Jed Anderson, who's number 37. And Jed's a young guy we brought into the list for a trade with GWS. He's very promising prospect, and he's shown a little bit in the VFL in the last few weeks, so he may get another Guernsey this week.
It's very hard to use the word critical and Hawthorn in the same sentence this year, because the Hawks have been a damn good side. But I went down to the G a couple of weekends ago and I watched that game against Richmond, and I've got to say, if that wasn't the worst Hawthorn performance I've seen since the last time you played Richmond last year, then I don't know what is. I mean, was there any reasoning behind that in your mind?
Richmond, and what Richmond did to us a couple of weeks ago bears some resemblance to what Adelaide nearly did to us in 2012 prelim. They really shelled us open through the middle, and it comes down to poor handling of the ball between centre and half forward. And once we turned it over on half forward, Richmond are just quicker. They had quicker legs, and they were a very good kicking team that day. They really used the ball very well. And what we have in great ball movement, we do lack in leg speed, and the Tigers were just able to spread better on us. And once they did that, it was over. So that's two seasons in a row the Tigers have done it to us in almost identical fashion. It's unerring, but for Collingwood to do that, they're really going to need to use the ball well, and they're going to need to really win their battles across Hawthorn's half-forward line. So your ball users in the back half are going to be very, very important.
It is almost the case when you watched the Pies last week of two different Collingwood sides that we've seen this year, Jekyll and Hyde. And it's good to see that we're putting the pressure on to find that form in this part of the season. Messenger, I'd like your opinion on the Hawthorn style. It's been labelled unsociable football. And from what I can see, one of the keys to getting through that press is spraying the ball from the contest, getting to the outside, and getting direct entries inside 50. That's pretty much what the Swans did on grand final day. Yep. Tigers, as you said, ran through the middle and kept their ball use really neat. What are your thoughts on the game plan, and how do you think it best comes unstuck? And I'm going to send this to Nathan Buckley as well.
Then what you always do is you leave Jared Roughhead loose in the goal square. That's the first plan to beating Hawthorn. Just write that down, Nathan. And let Clinton Young play fullback. No, the biggest issue there is with Hawthorn is you can't give them time and space with the ball. So it's really got to be a shutdown style game. I'm not sure that, and certainly in our most recent matches with Collingwood, I don't think Collingwood's really, they've probably just really given Hawthorn way too much space, particularly at the clearances. And once they do that, we use the ball well enough that we can get ourselves out of most predicaments. But from my point of view, that's certainly where it's going to be won. But also, again, it's tying down those half forwards and making sure that kick into forward 50 is a contested situation. And once you give them nice, clean shots, it gets very, very difficult from there.
All right, shall we move along to our quick questions portion of the evening? Messenger, should Collingwood be considered flag favourites if they can beat the Hawks?
No. I think no. I still think the team to beat this season is Geelong.
Very interesting. What about yourself, 76? Should we be flag favourites if we can beat the Hawks?
No, I don't think so, and I'm quite happy with the underdog status for as long as we can hold on to it.
Yeah, I like it. 76, what is Steele Sidebottom's best position?
I think a high half forward. I think, we saw him pop up and kick a few goals on last Saturday, and I think really that's when he's at his best.
76, should Alan Didak play on next year?
I don't think he will. Look, I think he's been a wonderful servant of the club, and love his game, love the way he plays, but time to hang up the boots, and I think give the young blokes a go.
What are your thoughts on that, Messenger?
I would think at his age, he is how old? 31?
30 or 31, yeah.
31. If he's not in your best 25 and he's 31, I would say no. I don't think you miss him at all. I think his best is well past him.
It comes back to the Brad Sewell point, doesn't it, though?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I think Brad Sewell's probably still in Hawthorn's best 22.
Yeah.
But I think you have to say with Didak, how many games do you realistically think he's going to play in a full strength team? And I think if you think he's probably, not in your best 25, then you probably get somebody as good on current form at a younger age.
Messenger, are Hawthorn a better side this year than last?
Yes, we're more even. I think the thing that hurt us in the finals and in the grand final particularly is we didn't get enough out of our bottom six. Those guys are to a man better, and I think we're a more even team this year.
Yeah, it's a good call. I certainly think that the Hawks have improved in a few areas around the ground. Adding guys like Brad Hill playing different roles. Brian Lake, for mine, was a quality acquisition. Despite his age, he's a very, very, very good defender.
And the other guy, Taylor DeRay, number 41, for those of you playing at home on Magpie BigFooty podcast bingo. He's been a long-term project, and he's come along, elite kicking skills, really tough little fella. Shane Savage has improved immensely. He was probably playing for his team, spot in the team on the list, to be honest, at the start of the season, but he's done very well. So they've got more out of the guys who were already there, and they've picked up a couple extras as well.
Good call. Messenger, does Channel 7 have the most annoying and worst commentary team of all time?
Oh, look, without a doubt. And we talked about this on the Main Board podcast. Romping wins plus Tom Harley plus Basil Zemplis equals television disaster.
I love it. That's fantastic. No, I've got to agree. What about yourself, 76? You get Channel 7's broadcast, obviously.
Foxtel. It's all Foxtel.
Oh, yes, Foxtel.
And my last question for the evening, 76, should Collingwood's midfield be considered among the best in the AFL?
Look, I think we've lost that mantle in the last couple of seasons. I'd say not at this stage, particularly with Beams still yet to find his best form. As I said earlier, Josh Thomas is still a very young player. He'll be a very good player for us, but let's be a bit patient with him. Luke Ball, he's playing as well as he ever has. Pendlebury, he's still finding touch. We spoke about that earlier. Dane Swan, look, he's still serviceable. He still racks up the touches. I don't think he's quite got his form of 2010, but he's still, fantastic. I wouldn't call us the best midfield in the AFL, but I'm very happy with what we've got.
What about yourself, Messenger? Do we have a midfield that you fear as a Hawthorn supporter?
I consider them one of the better midfielders in the competition. Absolutely. I think they're just at that point now where they might regenerate into a top 2 or 3 unit. Do I fear them? It's only football. I tend not to get scared about football, but I think they're a very good unit. They're something to be. I'd be very pleased if I was a Collingwood fan.
Well, it's going to be a very interesting game on Friday night. The Hawks have had a wood over us for a while, so hopefully we can even up the ledger and make it a nice, tight game. I want to thank you, Messenger, for coming on this week. You've been a fantastic addition to the podcast, and really appreciate you coming on.
It's my pleasure to fly the flag for the brown and gold tonight, and we'll have a terrific stoush on Friday night, and may the better team wearing brown and gold win.
I'm sure the better team, black and white, will win. And 76, thank you again for being an integral part of the show. You've been fantastic as always.
Oh, great to come on here. And look, just sing out to all the people listening. Thanks for following the podcast. Please get involved. Put your hand up. Jump on here. Come and join the chat. It's a lot of fun. We certainly appreciate the contribution of the opposition supporters like Messenger. Thanks for coming on.
No worries.
And for people who do come on, it was great to have Matty S come on last week. And hopefully we can get some newbies come on in future and come and join the chat.
Absolutely, I always enjoy interviewing and having our new panel members on. So it's a great thrill for me, and it is a great thrill for all those that can be part of the show. Please stick around. We've got the big interview with Jeff Kennett coming up, which, as I said, I can't wait for. But for another week, this is the Mighty T signing out.
Okay, welcome to the podcast. I'm here with Beyond Blue Chairman Jeff Kennett. Welcome to the podcast, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Andrew.
So how did you come to be involved in Beyond Blue?
Well, I founded it. But how did I start to show an interest in this area? In 1977, 2 years before I lost office, my daughter came to me one night in tears and said that two of her male friends, in totally unrelated and separate accidents, had lost their lives that week. And she said to me, "Dad, what can you do to stop these young men dying on the roads?" And I thought that was a challenge as Premier to reduce the road toll. But when I found out more about these young men, I realised that both of them were emotionally depressed. Both of them had used their vehicles to take their life. So, therefore, it wasn't an issue of reducing the road toll. It was how do we go about dealing with suicide, and given that we can't be standing beside another person 24/7, what leads to suicide? More often than not, that is depression, either clinical or emotional, and therefore I started to get advice on depression, which led me to establish the body which is now known as Beyond Blue, the year I got out of politics in the year 2000.
That's a very powerful story.
It's a very powerful story, and had my daughter not asked me that question, I have no doubt that Beyond Blue would not exist today, because at that stage I knew nothing about depression and very little about mental illness except for the title mental illness.
Yeah, so given that, given that that's the past and how it was founded, what do you see as the future? Well, I mean, what kind of future should we be striving for with mental health?
I think two or three things. Firstly, over that 13, 14-year period, we've lifted the profile of mental health. We talk about it more publicly. We've removed a lot of the stigma. Every government in Australia, regardless of its politics, has given mental health a higher priority, put new funds into it. And my work with Beyond Blue continues to be the most important work I've done in my adult life to date, except for family. And I'm very pleased that a lot of the issues that relegated mental health to being a below-the-carpet issue have been removed. So we've come a long way, but we should not be complacent. There are a lot of things happening in our society today that ensure that many of us are stressed, many are anxious, many are depressed. About 200,000 have a serious mental illness, and of course we have about 2,400 suicides a year, which averages it out at about 8 or 9 a day, which is just unacceptable.
Do you see with mental health that we can get to a stage where a lot of the talk seems to be about treatment and what people can do when they're suffering depression or anxiety, but do you see that there's much that we can do for prevention for getting to that stage in the first place?
Andrew, our work at Beyond Blue is devoted to both prevention and response. And we have done a lot of research. We have got programs now for women, antenatal and postnatal. We have programs going into schools. We have programs in the workplace. We are doing research up in the Northern Territory in terms of suicide. And we're about to roll out another research program throughout the country to see if we can't better utilise trained people to assist in helping those suffering depression. So your question is very pertinent. We have got to do more to educate ourselves about depressive illnesses. So when we notice our own behaviour changing. When we notice behavioural changes in those around us, we can actually do something about it, because many depressions, early detected, correctly diagnosed, can be cured. Left untreated, they can become very serious depressive illnesses.
Okay, you mentioned stigma a moment ago.
I mentioned what, sorry?
Stigma.
Yes.
And the stigma associated with mental illness. Now, obviously a lot of good work has been done in that area. Do you still think we've got some way to go with that?
Oh yes, there's no doubt about that. But you and I wouldn't be talking if we hadn't have removed a lot of that stigma. People talk about it more openly on radio. We see stories about it on television, in the press. So we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go, particularly with men and particularly with men in rural Australia. Okay.
And we talk about, say, use terms depression and anxiety, and they're common use in the lexicon now, but what do these terms actually mean? So somebody who, is exposed to these terms, what does that mean for them? What kind of symptoms would they be suffering?
Well, let's talk about one, anxiety, for instance, and then we'll talk about an emotional depression and then a clinical depression. An anxiety takes many, many forms. You often hear people talking about a panic disorder or a panic anxiety. So a person might be driving along in their car and something will happen as they're driving which puts them into panic mode, and they've got to pull over to the side and wait till that episode disappears. That's an anxiety. Now, stress and anxiety exists in life, and some stress and some anxiety can actually be helpful and produce good outcomes, but they will normally disappear. A panic disorder, a fear of flying, might be fairly consistent unless it receives assistance from a professional. So stress is an everyday thing in the main. Anxiety affects people differently. There are many forms of anxiety disorders. Emotional depression is where a person experiences an incident. It might be the death of a parent, it might be the death of a partner, it might be failing an exam, it might be messing up at work, and you get terribly emotionally depressed about it. But with most emotional depressions, while you might have them for 2 or 3 days and even longer, the human body is a remarkably recovering body, and these emotional depressions will often pass. Where they don't pass, then you should see a doctor, because they run the risk of becoming clinical depressions. A clinical depression, and I think there's about 14 ingredients that I refer to as ingredients into a clinical depression. If you have 3 or 4 of those existing together for 3 or 4 weeks, it's quite possible that you are suffering early signs of a depressive illness. So what might 3 or 4 of those symptoms be? You change your eating habits. You eat more, you eat less. You start losing confidence. You start withdrawing from people around you. You don't want to be with people. You start losing self-respect for yourself. You might even have sort of suicidal thoughts. So if 3 or 4 of those 14 symptoms exist for 3 or 4 weeks, I would strongly recommend that you see a doctor.
Okay. And what do you think? I mean, you mentioned how people can determine if they potentially suffer from depression or anxiety or one of the forms of these. But if they do believe they are, what should, or if indeed people around them are potentially suffering from that, what should they do about it? Should they contact their GP or Beyond Blue? Or
No, the GP is always the first port of call, or say the second. I would encourage all of your community to have a look at our website, www.beyondblue.org.au. That gives you a lot of information on a whole range of depressive illnesses, so you can actually educate yourself about depression very, very fully. If you then think you're suffering a depressive illness, our advice is to go and see a professional, and that being a doctor. If you have a serious illness and that doctor says he doesn't have or she doesn't have the qualifications, she'll refer you either to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. But It's a bit like an engine of a car. If it's not performing correctly and you don't know how to fix it yourself, then you go and look for a proper mechanic. The same with your body, the same with your mind.
Okay. So we're coming up to the Beyond Blue Cup between Collingwood and Hawthorn. How did the idea behind the Beyond Blue Cup come about?
We have been playing for a Beyond Blue Cup for some years now. Hawthorn has been playing it with the Geelong Football Club, and we're indebted to them for continually giving us the opportunity of raising this issue publicly and particularly educating the community in Geelong. But like many other things in life, it's good to bring about change because that freshens up the message and it freshens up the reach. So this time we're now going to play for the next few years Hawthorn against the Collingwood Football Club. Eddie Maguire has very graciously agreed to do it, as has his coach and players. And I guess Hawthorn has been involved simply because when we instigated the Beyond Blue Cup, I was president of Hawthorn, so I put forward one side of the equation being the football club and the players.
Okay, so finally, have you got a tip for the Hawks v Pies game? Do you think the Pies are a chance?
When it's only a two-horse race, either horse can always win. Whoever is the favourite can trip up just as they're going to the finish line. I mean, Hawthorn 2 weeks ago had a very good victory over Essendon, and yet last week were absolutely overridden by Richmond. On the other hand, Collingwood had a bad week 2 weeks ago and had a superb game in the weekend. So while you go in as a supporter of one team or the other very optimistic, we all know on the field there's nothing we can do. We can only support, we can only hope, and in many cases we can only pray.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly the competition's opening up at the end of this season. So that's
I think that's probably right. You've probably now got 4 teams that might be there at the end of the year in finals. Hawthorn, Geelong, Sydney, and maybe Fremantle.
Okay.
Maybe Collingwood, maybe 5.
Well, we certainly, this podcast is being produced by the Collingwood board. It'll be distributed right throughout the BigFooty board, but certainly we hope Collingwood will be there at the end, and we'll be crossing our fingers.
Well, I think the way you're finishing the season, and you've got to time yourself to finish strongly, it's very, very impressive. But as you know, at times injury, at times a bit of flatness. Obviously, your competitors, we all look forward to playing on that last day in September. You guys beat Hawthorn 2 years ago in that preliminary final. I'll never forgive myself for that loss. I mean, we're miles ahead of you. Eddie was saying to me at half-time and three-quarter time, this game's yours, and I kept saying to him, you never want to say that until the fat lady sings. Well, she sang all right that day, and we paid a high price, and we didn't finish off last year. And again, we lost to Sydney. So, you know, as I say, we go in with high hopes. At the end of the day, it will always be whoever plays the best on the day.
Fantastic. All right, well, thanks for talking to us today. You've been listening to 76 Wooden Spooners interviewing Jeff Kennett, the chairman of Beyond Blue. Thanks for your time today, Jeff.
That's a great pleasure. And Andrew, thank you for your interest. I thank your members in advance of them, hopefully in the privacy of their own home, having a look at our website, www.beyondblue.org.au.